Hello, listeners. Welcome to yet another special episode of Courage Talks. Special guest today is Pooja Goyal. She has got quite an illustrious career, starting with undergrad at IIT Delhi. Then she went to US for a while there, came back to India, did her MBA from INSEAD, and has had a amazing stretch of work at corporates and entrepreneurship going forward. She has decided to give back to the society in form of her engagements with Laksha and Ashoka University, and there's a lot to unravel on your journey. Welcome to Courage Talks, Pooja.
Thank you, Hetal. Delighted to be here.
Thank you. So the topic is Courage Talks. The story is my book, Against All Odds. So that's my dad's biography, which I wrote. And the story goes that when my father was diagnosed with cancer in June 2019, it suddenly struck me, and I told my dad that I'm going to write a book on you. And he was super excited, and I would want to believe that the fact that a book was going to come out on him, and he was an avid reader himself, allowed him to survive 12 months of late stage cancer. And the journey was very similar to Tuesdays with Maury. And I was down there in Gurgaon, and he was here in Coimbatore, and every 2 weekends I would come down and I would sit with him, and he would talk and I would record, and then I would transcribe everything that he shared about his school, about his growing up days, his college. The story goes that I came across a lot of instances of courage which he displayed in his normal life. And I thought, as an extension of marketing the book, I would take up the topic of courage, and that's how Courage Talks evolved. So what does courage mean to you?
That is very touching, Hetal. A very touching story. And in our family also, my mother-in-law battled with cancer, and I lost my mother last year. So kind of relate to what you talked about, kind of that last year. Courage, I've not thought honestly too much about courage, but when you pose that question, the visualization that comes to my mind is the man in the arena. Teddy Roosevelt's kind of prose on that, and it's a very powerful prose. I just changed the man with the person because it would be man and woman. But the idea is that I love that prose. It is not the critic who counts, not the person who points out how the strong one stumbles or where the doer of the deeds could have done them better. The credit belongs to the person who's actually in the arena, whose face is marred by dust, sweat, and blood, who strives valiantly, who errs, who comes up short again and again, because there is no effort without error and shortcoming, but who does actually strive to do the deeds. And then it goes on for some time. But I think to me, that kind of action, despite all your fears, is what defines courage. And when you think about a lot of the things that you do just on a day-to-day basis as well, it is about overcoming so many of your fears. And we are biologically wired to be afraid, to be watchful, to watch out for the loss of our status, power, money, family, health, friends. So you constantly have that, and it's a biological mechanism to keep us alive. Right? And at odds with it, and I've started to think about it a little bit, is at odds with it is your desire to be in the moment and be happy. And when you are able to overcome that fear and you be in that moment is when you begin to experience joy. So our ability to experience joy through action, I think for me would define courage.
Very interesting. And who's your role model for courage? Whom would you look up at from an example of courage?
I've always stumbled on that question. There are so many people I admire, but when you always look at the other side of their story, there is always, the closer you get, you see the other side of the story as well. So there might be traits that you might admire in people. So especially the people far out, I've never been able to say, okay, Gandhi ji is my role model or Roosevelt or whatever, anybody is my role model. But since I lost my mom last year, I have been thinking about her acts of courage. She was 88 when she passed away. Wow. And she was...
a young age, I would say.
Yes. She probably got married when she was 13 years old. She's not very educated. She brought up 5 kids in a state of pretty tough circumstances, lack of money, all of that. And since I kind of knew her, I just saw she was always, I never saw her underconfident. She couldn't speak English. But even if there were friends who were speaking English, she would be very confident about it. She never let anyone say anything to the kids, to the grandkids, and always stood up for us. Everything, it was like, go ahead, do it, despite the fact that she herself had not had those experiences. So I think of my mom when I think of courage. And as I told you earlier, I have not thought about courage too much so far. It's only through our conversation that I started thinking about that framing.
Yeah, very interesting. We know a lot about your growing up days, but we might not know much about childhood. So why don't you just take us down memory lane? 𝗪𝗪 𝗀𝗏 𝗵𝗂. What are the few memories that you have of your childhood? The oldest memory you have of your childhood that you would like to narrate and talk about?
Oldest, it might be interesting. I grew up in Jaipur. I'm the youngest of 4 sisters. And pretty much I say that I have 4 sets of parents. My 3 sisters are so much older than me that they've always played the kind of motherly role for me. So my sister, who's just older than me, Madhu Didi, she was the one who insisted that I read. She herself is not a reader, but she wanted me to read.
Yeah.
And so some of my fondest memories are sitting on our chat on the terrace with a book and reading, like Enid Blyton's. And so a lot of the imagery from that kind of helped me fly to different parts of the world and inhabit worlds in my imagination. So
Very interesting.
Enid Blyton, they'd say, oh, it was a bright, gorgeous, sunny day, and they would be out with pink lemonade and stuff. And I'm like, how can sunny days be nice and gorgeous? I was growing up in Jaipur where we had 45-degree temperatures, right? So it was a really big contradiction for me.
And you mentioned about your mother, but any memories or instances about your father that you have from your childhood?
Yeah, my father, he was, I think, very ahead of his time. So with 4 daughters, I think he was always convinced that they need to get the best education. Despite limited monetary means, economic means, he ensured that all of us were in good schools. The thing was, these were convents and the fee was like some 10 rupees, 15 rupees, but you really got high quality education. So education was a big thing for him. And the second thing was just being self-dependent. I think that notion was there from get-go that you should be able to manage on your own. And that kind of defined a lot of the choices that I made later in life. Ghazals. He loved listening to ghazals. We had a whole stack of LPs. So I think I got my interest of music and ghazals from him.
Any favorite ghazal which stays with you?
Oh, lots, like Mehdi Hasan. The one that I like a lot is actually Mirza Ghalib, the हजारों ख्वाहिशें ऐसी कि हर ख्वाहिश पे दम निकले बहुत थे मेरे अरमान लेकिन फिर भी कम निकले.
Very beautiful. What were your dreams while growing up? What did you always want to become?
Astronaut. But the general, at that time, the way it manifested was being out of Jaipur. As I said, I read a lot, and you kind of read about so many of these worlds which you are then curious about. Especially as a girl, there were a lot of people around. You could see that if you do not study, if you're not able to get out, so going out of Jaipur became the proxy for flying with your wings. So my dream was to essentially get to a position where you can make your own choices and decisions.
Right.
As a woman and as a girl, while nobody said it, I think it was so imbued in the ecosystem, families, everything around that you lose agency as you grow older, you get married, you have kids as a woman. So I think that notion was very strong that I want to be able to make all my choices, good or bad. And for that, financial freedom and ability to earn and ability to be financially independent would be a very critical requirement for that.
Right. So after IIT Delhi, the migration to US was something which was always on the cards, or it was?
Not at all. When IIT, again, I did not know what engineering entailed, what IIT was. I just landed there. First year was great, even though I felt like everybody else was smarter than me. And then I landed there because there had been some mistake. But I enjoyed all of the math, physics, chemistry, the common subjects. When we got into chemical engineering, is I started to realize, oh my God, I can't see myself doing this all my life. And so I was very clear that I wanted to do an MBA. And I was at a company called Feedback Ventures. At that time, it was clear if you wanted to work in consulting, marketing, you needed to have an MBA. So that thinking was always there in my head. But the move to the Bay Area was with my husband. He decided to go do his MBA first, and so I moved with him
Okay.
to the US.
Got it.
That was in 99.
Got it. And the interesting element about Profile, which I realized, was that your entrepreneurship journey did not start with Intellitots. It started with a failed startup back in Valley. So why don't you just walk us through what happened and what went wrong?
Lots of things went wrong. That was a period of just the dot-com boom. It was kind of that first big boom where startups were getting built left, right, and center. There was a startup called Webvan, which had raised just so much money. It was grocery thing and all.
Yeah.
And I was looking at different options there. One of my seniors from IIT Delhi was working on this startup in enterprise software space. And so we were four of us. Three of them had already started work on it. I joined as the fourth person. And we raised money. We did some pilots. We raised 2 rounds, angel rounds, pilots, built a product. And then in 2001, the big bust happened, where the market completely collapsed. And that's when Alliance was the name of the company, Alliance went down. And by that time, I had kind of started to think, oh my God, I've made some really risky choices in life, which is, I had an offer from Infosys right out of IIT, and I said, no, I'll join this small consulting firm. Then went with my husband to the US and started this startup, which went nowhere. So it was 6 years into it, and I was feeling very kind of, you made some risky choices. Now you better work with some large organizations and build a brand, basically. And then I thought maybe that is a good time to go do an MBA. I didn't have kids at that time, so I decided to then go to France and pursued my MBA for a year, which was one of the most fun years for me. And then came back to the Bay Area. And then I was very sure I didn't want to do a startup, but I wanted to work with a more established company, though the market was still bad at that time because 9/11 had happened while we were doing our MBA. And it just made the markets really bad from finding a job perspective. The way I got this opportunity at PalmSource was Eric Benhamou was visiting INSEAD. And I happened to tell him, look, I'm doing a strategy project on platforms and the evolving role of platforms and comparing Sun Microsystems with SAP. And Palm was building that platform for mobile phones at that time. So he said, oh, that's very interesting. And I said, I'd love to talk to your leadership and would be happy to then present the findings. And he then invited me to the Bay Area. I met with all of the leadership of the Palm folks. And when I graduated, then I at least had enough connects in the leadership team that I was able to convert it into a role at the company. And I joined then Palm as managing the developer marketing ecosystem for Palm.
Got it. How was that experience? Post MBA, did you feel that you had a spring in your legs? You were able to command different level of authority, and all the learning that at your B school really worked to your advantage?
Absolutely. That's the funny thing about B school. If you say, okay, what exactly did you learn? And actually, maybe it's about, like, even when I think about my engineering experience and then my B school experience, it is not the content and the frameworks and the equations and how it is some of the horizontal skills that you built by being there. So in B school, the biggest learning came from really the cohort and the friends, and almost 72 countries were represented in our class of 300 students. And average incoming experience was like 5.5 years. So there were people with long years of experience. Just as you were looking at business problems, just coming at it from different angles was huge value. I remember my first group. So the way they do it in the first period itself, there would be a group that would get common grades, and almost 50% of our grade was common to the casework that we do.
Yeah.
And in that group, there was one person who was an accountant who worked at Unilever. One person was a Wall Street trader. He was originally from Burkina Faso and had come to New York. The third person was Dutch, and he was with McKinsey. The fourth person was a sales leader. He used to be the sales leader for Mars in Portugal. And I came from a tech product marketing. So I still remember that the first case that we got, all of us came at it from different angles. We read the case, and when we came in and analyzed it, the person, the accountant from Unilever, she had gone to the appendix. She knew the balance sheet and the P&L, and she approached it directly like, this seems wrong. And I had not even looked at that. The salesperson approached it from the feet on the ground. This is what we need to fix. I approached it from go to market. And it was that, I think, was just mind opening, that how the same problem can be attacked from different points of view, and then also the value in coming up. And because our fortunes were tied, and we were forced to really discuss it, to listen, to lean in, problem solve together. So the B school experience enabled that, which was your ability to listen and problem solve from various angles.
Interesting. And then you had to get back to India to take care of aging parents. What was the story like, and how was the transition for you?
So I had moved to Adobe after Palm, and I was managing the Acrobat, part of the Acrobat product marketing team, and I just enjoyed it thoroughly. But then my mother-in-law was diagnosed with late-stage cancer. She was actually going to move in with us in the US. But then when that happened, she decided to stay put. And then my husband and I decided that we would move back for 2 years. We actually talked to individually our companies. My Alok spoke to SAP. He was with them. I was with Adobe. Both the companies were super supportive. And our kids were 1 and 3 at that time. So we moved back to India, and I moved with Adobe. But it was a very, very difficult move. And I think it was made difficult because we came in with a little bit of a bravado as well, that, we know how India works. We've grown up here. We've been visiting every 6 months. And it was quite hard to move back. That first year took a lot of adjusting.
And I know you created quite a furor by talking about the childcare facilities at Adobe. So why don't you just narrate us what happened?
Oh, yeah, that was with my first daughter at Palm. And after I had my daughter, and California has very bad maternity policies. So if you have a natural delivery, you get 6 weeks. If you have a C-section, at least at that time, C-section, it was 8 weeks. And then California adds 2 more weeks that you have. So just beyond that, I think I was carrying so much of pressure on my head that, look, once I have my daughter, will happen to my career. And so that was a tremendous pressure on my head. And I was kind of out to prove that, okay, things will be the same. So I actually went back to work at the 9-week mark. But at the same time, there was pressure to, not pressure actually, which is all done so much. And at that time, there was no Google. It was what to expect when you're expecting, and you kind of heard. That was the Bible.
Yeah, that's true.
And it said, look, you have to nurse. Nursing your baby is the best thing that you could do for them. And so I was very determined to nurse for at least 1 year. And as I went back at the 10-week mark, realized that there were no facilities for nursing in the building. My manager was a woman, and she was super supportive. I spoke to her. She said, let's figure something out. One of the meeting rooms was actually converted into a nursing room, which was very strange, actually. It was just such a strange thing that and it was a covered meeting room. But then the interesting thing happens that there were actually 5 women who were coming back, and from different streams. One was a Mexican lady who was an admin Another one was a sales leader. Another one was a tech project manager. I was in marketing. And it was just the most awkward of beginnings, but then we became such good friends. And also kind of the support network for us, which all of us, we were able to get through that period. But what that kind of showed me is that now in hindsight, when I think it's important to speak up, a lot of the time we kind of look at these things and then we don't speak up. Some of these challenges are there because nobody has thought about it. There are legacy challenges. And so when you experience it, you are in the best place to actually speak up, and some solution comes, and then it helps the people who are coming after you. And I was able to nurse for 1 full year while working full time at
And then how did Intellitots happen? I believe there is a similar story about not feeling happy with child education and child.
Yeah.
Give us that very first instant, that eureka moment which happened, which prompted you to start Intellitots.
Yeah, when we were moving and I spoke to a few friends and they said, "Nahi, Pooja, a lot has improved. There are good facilities. So there is enough childcare. You can actually get governesses as long as you're willing to pay." And I said, okay, great. After we came back, I actually went to all of the preschools in Gurgaon. I kind of went to them and I said, okay, so what are the timings? They'd say 9:30 to 12:30. Like 12:30, who will pick her up? I'm at work at that
You have a
time.
lunch break. You can go during lunch break.
So really none of them offered full day. So after about 3 or 4, I thought maybe I'm missing the vocabulary here. It's a different name, etc. But I just couldn't find a facility. This was in 2007. And so that was one. And then I was trying to find support staff at home, full-time, live-in, everything. We must have gone over like 4, 5, 6 nannies over 6 months. And then I found a really expensive one. I was trying to look for someone educated. She could speak English, वगैरह. So I said, okay. I was paying her some 42,000 at that time in
Wow.
2007 per month. And but so then you have to hear this. In about a month's time, my driver, he told me, ki, ma'am, she has been asking me to get gutka and some other stuff and smoking things, etc. And then I was like, oh my God, Jivan, you have to stop. And then I was letting her go. And my sister said, look, you have to check her bags. And I said, I am not checking anybody's bags. Like, that's just invasion of privacy. And I said, if you have to, you do. So my sister actually was asked her to open the bag and looked at it. Yeah. And there were cards that came out which showed that she was actually an escort.
Oh, man.
And that was like the moment for me, which was like, this is a risk I'm not willing to take. Until that time, I was planning for a startup in health foods. And I kind of built the business plan for it. I could see that it would have capital requirements, it involved travel. But then that kind of said, this is a risk I'm not willing to take. And then started to think about, this is a big gap in the market. Because when we were in the US, we'd have these programs like Jamboree, parent-toddler programs, which just were not there in Gurgaon. So my co-founder is also my friend from IIT Delhi. She was also moving back to India. Her children were the same age as mine. We were kind of brainstorming on different ideas. I'd come back from Adobe, put the kids to bed at night, and then go to her place. She was a neighbor as well. So we'd go to her place like 9:30, and then we would spend an hour or so brainstorming on what were the different things we could do. And that's how we came up with the idea of Intellitots. It was a very small, it was like, it's a problem.
When did the conversation go from food to Intellitots?
Food, that was in my head. This food one, I was the one I had it individually, my plan. And when I started to speak to Shivani, my friend, said, look, I think this is an interesting opportunity to pursue. It will be a cash flow business. We could have flexibility. As we talked and brainstormed, we realized the biggest currency at that stage of our life was flexibility. So we were really trying to see how could we get that flexibility at that time. So we said, okay, let's test it out. And we tested it out. We started a small parent-toddler program with some of our friends' kids in our apartment complex where we used to live. And that really was a success very quickly. It filled up. We said, okay, that's great. Let's then rent a place. And so it pretty much grew organically from there. And some of the baseline principles that we agreed on was that we would bootstrap it. And that was the learning from my first startup, that I knew that if you take even $1 from anyone, then you lose your flexibility. Then you really need to build, you then need to give the return. Whenever you're taking money, essentially you're taking it with the promise that you will give a higher return than what's available in the market. And without that clarity in mind, it doesn't make sense to raise any money. And with that, you lose your flexibility. So we decided that we would bootstrap it, and we built it over 9 years. We made our initial kind of capital expenditure, and then since after that, it was pretty much profitable after 1.5 years and waitlisted. Once the first center was waitlisted, we opened the other one, then the third one, and the fourth one. And the big kind of come to Jesus moment came when 2015, I think the maternity benefits bill came. And then we started getting approached left, right, and center from so many companies like Google, Ernst & Young about setting up daycares in their facility. And we knew that that would mean we would need to raise money. And that would mean a radical restructuring of the business.
Right.
So as we went out to actually look at funding options, there were a couple of acquisition offers as well. And that's when we decided to sell the company.
What was the reason for that strong decision not wanting to raise capital? I mean, is it because you had been in Valley and you had probably got exposed to ventures who had really gone through a different journey? The reason I'm asking, it's part of my PhD topic as well, because my PhD topic is around entrepreneur-VC relationship. And I do understand that the journey of an entrepreneur changes dramatically after venture capital comes in. So was that your learning from the Bay Area which prompted you to focus on that?
Absolutely. In the Bay Area, like when we raise the money, and that's how Bay Area operates. You are building rocket ships.
You're building ventures for the VC.
Yeah. And now that my husband's VC as well, I understand the mechanics even more. You are raising these funds for 7 to 9 year window. During that period, you want to build a couple of rocket ships that will give the return of the fund. And I didn't understand it that much, but I did understand that when you raise money, you do have to give that's high risk capital, and that you do have to give a big return. And at that stage of life, when you are kind of just trying to adjust in India with 2 kids, an ailing parent, where every weekend we were doing chemos, etc., figuring out the doctors, etc. It was just so much on the plate for both Alok and me. And I was like, I don't want to add anything to the plate. But I also could not see myself not doing anything. That option never even came to my mind. That don't do anything. So that was the middle compromise at that stage, that look, while the kids are little and we need this flexibility, let's just bootstrap it. So it was a very conscious decision, and it was a conscious decision to not build a rocket ship. And therefore, the financial returns would not be that high. But also, the madness of building that rocket ship will also not be there. So for us, it ended up then being a wonderful journey. Like the 100 people of Intellitots, we just got together about 6 months ago.
Oh, wow.
And everybody, all the teachers were there, and we reminisced about those days. Just being with children, thinking about learning was a fantastic time. And essentially, when you bring in money, especially venture capital money, and at that time, I didn't know what were the other sources, like getting debt for something like this is hard. When you bring in money, the focus goes from child at the center of the venture to rapid growth. And that takes the focus away from the child. So we continue to be focused on the child, how the child's brain is developing. We went down the research path. So yes, the kind of cons of it was that we were not able to scale the methodology, the pedagogy, and the business. Pros was that we built over 9 years of fantastic business that all 100 people who are involved in really look back at with something meaningful that they did during that decade.
Right. So there's a very common terminology in entrepreneurship. They say that you can't throw money at every problem, right?
Yeah.
And since you refused venture capital, you didn't even have money to throw. I'm assuming you had. You
Yeah.
didn't have. Even if you had, you say you didn't have. Okay.
Yeah,
But
when you are putting in your money, you are extremely careful with
exactly.
every
Yeah.
penny, right? That you
Yeah.
are. But I have seen, and in my third company, we did raise Avishkaar, we did raise some money.
Yeah.
There is actually a push to spend a lot of money, even when the unit economics doesn't work.
You feel that your action should be justified by spending money.
Yes.
But in your journey, is there any specific example or instance of the kind of challenges you had to overcome? Any incident or any part of the journey which remains tough one, where good example or good demonstration of courage?
You keep bringing it back to courage, and I never think in those terms. So I'm thinking anytime when you are shifting your identity in any way, it's been hard. When I was working with Adobe, I had a certain identity of being a corporate professional. And then as transitioned into Intellitots, it was almost an educator identity more than even an entrepreneurial identity. And so the first 3, 4 years, we were kind of, the starting was very good. 3, 4 years, I was beginning to get itchy and I was saying, okay, what next? How are we going to grow? Okay, we have 4 or 5 centers, but how do we go beyond that? And every sale, every negotiation was such a hard road. And I remember a dear friend, he also runs a PE fund. I was talking to him and I said, what do you think we should do? Like we seem to be stuck. And he said, Pooja, anything meaningful just takes time. Like give it 5 years at least. Just keep doing what you're doing. Things will begin to move. And I'm not exaggerating. It was around the 4.5, 5 year mark that one of the big hospitals, Fortis, came to us because their parents had sent their kids to Intellitots. Some of their leadership parents used to send their kids to Intellitots. They said, we are opening our flagship center. Why don't you set up Intellitots here? And that's how kind of that breakthrough happened. A new model happened. We were able to. But there was a long period where we were thinking like, okay, what next? We don't know what's. And during that period, just staying patient was an act of courage, I can say. Also, from an identity perspective, right? So many people at that time would ask this question, Puja, chemical engineering karke you're running a preschool? And I didn't have a good answer to that at that time. And in fact, one of my previous bosses said that to my former colleague. And when the company got sold, like at 9 year mark, she said, see, I'm going to go tell him now that that's what she's been able to build. But during that period, it was a period of some self-doubt and not going anywhere. So patience many a times is an act of courage. And now that I look in hindsight through many different stages, one comes to realize that it is through compounding that some of the returns come to you. And during those periods when you are having to be patient, when you feel stuck, you feel like nothing is happening because above the surface, nothing is happening. But below the surface, deep work is happening because you are questioning yourself. You are trying to see, okay, where might the unlocks be? What can you do? So, if done right, those periods can be a rich opportunity to really know yourself and can really provide the fuel when the opportunity comes to really be able to accelerate your journey. That's an understated virtue, being patient during challenging times.
Displaying emotion or vulnerability is another big sign of courage. Any instance that you recollect during the journey where You could not hold back your emotions. Anything that brought you to that stage where it became a challenge. And of course, the fundamental facet of entrepreneurship that I've noticed is a strong bifurcation of personal and professional life. And in a business like that, what you were in, it could probably not have been easy because the lives were quite intertwined.
Right.
Your kids were your first customers, if I may say.
That's right.
Did it come to that stage at any point of time where you felt that you were losing the balance?
I'm normally an open person, so I've not had any challenge with being vulnerable. I'm mostly able to let people know if I'm feeling uncomfortable. I do not have the need for that. But having said that, the whole journey with the co-founder while we were friends, it took us some time. And that was the disadvantage of not having investors, not having board members, not having people to kind of work through. So it was just my co-founder and I who had to work through a lot of the issues. So I think it was more, rather than vulnerabilities, were more managing conflict and situations where there would be honestly meetings where we would go in and we'd come out and I'd say, oh, that went well. I think that makes, and my co-founder would say exactly the opposite of that. Literally, it was like, were we in the same meeting? But that, when you are able to harness the power of that complementarity, it really takes you a long way. Figuring out our mechanisms to manage conflict, both of us would not talk too much about it. So, what I had to work very hard on was actually making sure I write to her. And through that, we resolved many of the issues that would crop up.
Mm-hmm. So somewhere in the literature, they talk about the co-founder chemistry not being drastically different from the husband-wife chemistry. So where did you have those learnings from, and where was the implementation? Was it learning at home getting implemented at work, or the other way around?
Actually, to your point, a couple of meetings, I would introduce us as I saying, this is Shivani, my partner, and I'm Pooja. And then after a few of those, Shivani would say, business partner. But, in Alok, in my case, Alok can be very upfront. He's very comfortable with conflict. In fact, the vulnerability might be the harder thing for him. In my case, being vulnerable is easy. Managing conflict is the hard part. And I think through our partnership, Alok's and mine, I have gradually worked hard to not keep things bottled up. And I think that helped our professional relationship, where I had to make a conscious effort to be able to express whatever challenges I was feeling or facing.
Very interesting. So when shifting corporate jobs, you obviously think about the next job before you leave this one, the current one. Between Intellitots and Avishkaar, what was the gap like, and what was the period like? What the idea for the need for Avishkaar already was breeding while you were at Intellitots? Did you seed some early stage ideas already into it? What was the story like?
After Intellitots got sold, it was a tough period for me because again, it was an identity crisis of, okay, what next? And,
Vacuum.
a vacuum suddenly. Till I was not that young and I was not that old. So I had to do something, but I didn't know what. So it was a tough process. And I think being acquired by KLAY, the founder of KLAY, Priya and I ended up becoming good friends. So that gave me that 1.5 years of blue sky thinking while building Intellitots and KLAY together. So I did a lot of blue sky thinking during that period to again just understand myself and essentially frame that period as opportunity, that I now had the opportunity to think through what I wanted to do next. So designing your life was something that I stumbled against at that time. There was a book, Designing Your Life.
There's a course in Stanford for that, right?
Yes, that's right. But I had that book. Somebody had gifted it to me sometime. It was lying on my shelf. I picked it up once or twice, was not interested. But then here I started to kind of read through it. And it really provided a good framework to think about how to design your life. And through that process, a few things became clear to me. One of the things that I wanted to really think about. One was the problem solving at scale. It was bothersome for me that Intellitots, we had a very strong product, we had a strong methodology, but we were not able to scale it beyond one Delhi NCR region. So that kind of kida was there, that I wanted to think about problem solving. And the more I read about it, the more I realized that when you think about problem solving, it is a fundamentally different approach to thinking of solving a problem organically. My
Hmm.
instinct is to approach problem solving organically. You see a problem, you jump into it, you figure it out, you keep expanding and doing it better. But when you think about problem solving at scale, it is a top down view of, you look at the landscape and the forest and say, here are the opportunities. This is the problem of today. This is the forest of today. This is what I want the forest of tomorrow to look like. This is the strategy to get there. So it's a fundamentally different approach. And I wanted to think about that. And the second one was again linked to my children, is like, as the children were growing, I was thinking K through 12 schooling system, literally, it is not built around how children learn. And some of the tech education that all of us, as we get into our workplaces, we are just using tech left, right, and center. We talk about innovation, we talk about the ability to code, program, etc. But in school, we just don't do a good enough job. So those were the two big ideas, and I was trying to marry them. In fact, after the sale, my co-founder, Vani, and I also tried to build some robots ourselves, tried to see how we could get them manufactured, etc. And through that period, then I I happened to meet with Tarun approached me, who's the founder of Avishkaar, and they already had a very decent product. It was a team of engineers looking to scale, and I thought it would be a great complementarity and fit. And that's how I joined hands with Avishkaar. And we ended up setting up almost 3,000 robotics, coding, AI labs across India and in Africa as well. We started a whole B2C segment. And so now these humanoid robots are available on Amazon as well. A difficult market, again, the whole question of whether it is VC fundable or not. But we did raise money and the company grew quite rapidly. But it was through that journey of fundraising during COVID, mentoring a lot of other fellow entrepreneurs, that this whole idea. So, education was the core where I was thinking about problems. Kind of how women face systemic barriers there was on the periphery. And I was kind of coming across it. I'd never given that any deep thought. I read a fantastic book called Invisible Women at that
Mhm.
time, really
Yeah.
worth reading. And she really, a lot of the information we get on this is anecdotal. She really actually threw data at all of the different problems. And I also started to mentor a number of women entrepreneurs during COVID. So somehow the barriers that women face in as they rise through their careers or as they're building startups became bigger in my mind. And again, this problem solving at scale question continued to stay. So that's how the transition from Intellitots to Avishkaar happened first, and then from Avishkaar to Udaiti.
So, what made you change your mind about venture capital in Avishkaar?
Stage of life and the so once the kids were older, 8, 9 years old, then you don't need that kind of flexibility. It was literally stage of life. And so the desire to build something bigger was there. And that's why at Avishkar, then we said, like, stage of life and also the nature of business. I'd say
Hmm.
both. I believe that there was enough capacity to absorb the capital and use it for growth.
Any mistakes that you recollect that during your Avishkar journey, which the world might not know about?
Lots. One was, we started our journey during COVID. So my team was in right before COVID. Actually, we started about 6 months ago, and I thought, okay, we'll be able to make it work. I was in Bangalore. My co-founder was in Delhi, and the team was in Delhi as well. And then COVID hit, so travel even became harder. But just, I think it is so hard to build a startup with the two co-founders in different places. So I think I definitely underestimated the challenges of a distributed team at that time. Another one probably was, I think we must have pitched to like 100 VCs, and we kept hearing and it took us a long time to get that message that getting hardware funded to VCs is hard. Also, if there is a company that's been there for long, it becomes even harder. So that journey took us a long time. If I were to redo it, I would probably make some of those changes early on before actually, because it was very exhausting to kind of go in and keep getting no's over and over again. Those would be the two things I'd say.
Yeah. And you had a stint of mentoring other entrepreneurs during and around COVID. How is impacting someone else's journey drastically different from controlling your own venture?
Hugely. Just like that man in the arena thing, right? It is, you can sit in the chair and give advice, and to the other person, it just seems like, oh, you know everything, you know
आपके लिए
this.
तो सब easy है.
एकदम easy hai. But when you are in the arena, you don't have that benefit of hindsight. You have to take action at that time. You don't have all the answers. So you are making your decisions based on limited information that you have in a short amount of time. So I think it is absolutely easy to give advice, but I think doing it is the hard part. It helps actually more than giving advice as a coach or a mentor. If you can just listen, many a times that is what helps clarify the thinking of the person who's in the arena, because that just the act of being able to speak to someone clarifies the thinking. So आजकल I feel like advice is तो हर जगह you open any channel, anything. LinkedIn also is full of advice on everything. So I think it is, we know a lot. It is when you are in the arena and you are trying to shift your own mental habits, you are trying to make anything move, fix a problem, is where the big challenge comes.
And it being more in a remote location when Avishkaar was getting formed in during COVID, do you think turned out to be an advantage? Do you think that you were more focused in the online discussions vis-a-vis being together under the same roof? Probably you avoided a few conflicts. Is that a possibility that comes to your mind?
I don't think so. In hindsight, lately I've found myself in the same place where I am based in Bangalore and my team is in Delhi. And I learned a little bit from my experience at Avishkaar. What I've realized is in hybrid teams, the act of relationship building needs a lot of face to face time. And the act of resolving some of the conflicts, that face to face ideation, anything that is divergent thinking, managing conflict, building a relationship, understanding the other, that really requires a face to face time. Once you've established that comfort and it is about implementing things, making it, the virtual discussions then make it a lot more effective and efficient as well. I think that initial time of building the relationship requires that it is a contact sport. It really requires that time together to iron out how you work, how you think. And Udaiti, it's been the same, which is first few years now, I've just had to spend a lot more face time with my team. If a new person is being onboarded, just ensuring that you are there face to face. Because despite the fact that these virtual platforms are so good, there is just a lot of bad body language you pick when you are in a face to face discussion. So I would say that it is still, despite all of the advantages of these virtual meeting tools, you do need that face to face interaction.
Very interesting. And before I come to Udaiti, you have had a significant contribution in two of the largest educational brand names, Ashoka and Plaksha. What's been your learning engaging with these two brands, and what has been the difference that you have seen having got associated with education at a mass scale or a different level of category of students compared to what you were doing at Intellitots and Avishkaar?
So one, it is extremely insignificant kind of contribution, and my husband and I, who are associated with both. Ashoka is more recent, but 𝗪𝗏, we have been fortunate to be part of the initial discussions when kind of the whole thinking around this was evolving. And while we were not involved at the beginning, a number of our very close friends were. The whole thinking was that, look, have IITs, NITs, they have been great institutions, but when it comes to the curriculum, the way things are taught, some of the teachers are brilliant, the students are brilliant, but I think it is still not kept pace with the times. And now when you think about innovation, where new discoveries are happening, it is always at the intersection of 2 or 3 disciplines. The way our traditional college curriculum is structured is, okay, you are doing thermodynamics and you are doing biotech course here and you are doing heat transfer here. But a lot of actually physical systems or even other systems, they require knowledge of many different streams. So that was the big idea, that as we think about engineering education or technical education, how do we create a curriculum that essentially allows for that flexibility to the student? And the second one was the builder aspect of it, where you're actually physically building stuff and not just theoretically solving problems. That was the idea, and really being able to build a world-class institution over a short period of time through collective philanthropy. Ashoka kind of led the way with this whole idea of collective philanthropy. So many different professionals have come together and contributed to this. Since the liberalization of 1992, a lot of the first generation professionals have made money, and they're at that stage of their lives where they are giving back. So at 𝗪𝗏, that was the idea that it would be harder to take a current institution and make changes to it. Rather, a greenfield would make a lot more sense. And therefore, it was kind of established at a greenfield stage, and a number of people like you and I came together, and some really rich people as well, wealthy people, who have come to really support the forming of that institution. And I think in a very short period of time, it's been able to build a very strong brand, much like Ashoka.
Very interesting. And how did the whole idea around Udaiti Foundation come about? What was the driving force which prompted it? Again, was it something that was in the works all through your entrepreneurial journey? And any story behind the name, in case if I may ask?
So the force behind it is Ashish Dhawan, and he was incubating this organization. His office reached out to me, so I joined as the kind of the first CEO, and the name had already been picked. Uday means the rising, and Udaiti means the woman rising, or the feminine version of rising. But our North Star at Udaiti is to really increase the participation of women in the formal workforce. So today, because of all of the investments in women's health, women's education, India has one of the largest population of educated women. In fact, the gross enrollment ratio for women is more than that of men in many, many states. And so 52% of employable workforce is women. But in the formal workforce, there is only 18% women. And that has stayed static for the last 5-8 years now. And therefore, if we are talking about economic growth of the country, we are in this position where we are at the 4th largest economy, we could become the 3rd largest economy. As we think about that growth journey, it will be extremely important to unlock this talent pool that is actually ambitious, capable, wants to actually contribute and be in the workforce, but because of systemic barriers, they are not in the workforce. And if they are, then they leave. So like 7-8 year mark, there is like a big drop of women in the workforce. So what we at Udaiti are doing is collaborating, all three, actually government, private sector and civil society organizations to really identify the big levers that we could use in order to get more women into the formal workforce.
And have you made significant progress, or it's still work in progress?
Still work in progress. The way the government measures labor force participation, it's called FLFPR, female labor force participation rate. So the denominator is all the women in the age bracket of 16 to 60. And the numerator is any woman who's getting paid. And that number has gone up from 27 to 37 to 41 over the last 3 years, 41%. But the challenge is that all of this increase is in rural areas or in self-employment. And the way it is measured is still, if you've been paid for 1 hour of work during the week, then you'll be counted there. So you're still not in formal work. So the formal work still continues to be at 18%. But the good news is that because of our focus on economic growth, and one, the government at the center, the Prime Minister has talked about it, that this is a key priority. We talked about women-led development. So at a state level, any state that is thinking about economic growth is also thinking about women's participation in the workforce. Because they realize that, so for example, Uttar Pradesh has put out its $1 trillion economy agenda. Odisha has put out $500 billion agenda. Maharashtra probably will be the first state to reach $1 trillion economy. And so all of these states are then very committed to getting more women into the formal workforce. And again, the hopeful or optimistic part is that there are industries where new jobs are getting created, like logistics or flexi staffing or pharma. And the percentage of women there is really, really abysmal right now. So in logistics, for example, we are expecting about 10 million jobs to be created in the next 2 to 3 years. And the percentage of women there is 1 to 5% in different roles. So there is a long way to go for us, but there is opportunity there because you do have supply, you do have demand. What you need to do is figure out how do you dismantle the barriers around entry time, around retention, return to work, to really, and aspiration as well. Women don't even think about joining a logistics or warehousing kind of a role. So those are the challenges we are now trying to work on with the government, with private sector.
So while you're encouraging women to onboard in the workforce, especially the blue collar workforce, is technology and entrepreneurship two important subjects, or they are more like a horizontal in the whole place?
You actually bring out a very good point. So when you say our North Star is to increase women in the formal workforce, and the two big pathways that we see are employment through jobs, through quality jobs, and entrepreneurship. And when you say entrepreneurship, it's like this big elephant. Somebody sees the ear, somebody sees the tail. Different people think about it differently. When we are thinking about entrepreneurship, we are thinking of women entrepreneurs as job creators. So there are 49 million women entrepreneurs in the country today, but in urban areas, only 600,000 employ one more person besides themselves. It's probably a misnomer. It's like a lot of these are self-employed, one person working and counted as an entrepreneur. One is we won't be able to create so many jobs to get 145 million women into the workforce. 145 million employable women are out of workforce in India right now.
Wow.
So we won't have those many jobs. So that is one pathway. The other pathway will have to be entrepreneurship in rural areas, in peri-urban areas, and helping the current set of entrepreneurs scale so that they can become job creators. And we have a very successful model with the self-help groups already. Again, that is group-based. So how can we build a ladder from SHG to SME there? That will also enable large volumes of women to get into the formal workforce.
There's a beautiful book by David Brooks, The Second Mountain. Are you already on your second mountain, or there's still a lot more to do in the first one?
I don't know if it's my second mountain, third mountain. But yes, I would say it is my second mountain now, where this aligns with how I would want to be and not where I would like to get.
Very interesting. A lot of people who might not really know you and might not have seen this podcast might term you to be extremely successful and probably lucky. Would you really say that you have been lucky, or is it that you put up a great way of not showing the amount of hard work that you put in?
I mean, lucky for sure. So many opportunities that come your way are serendipitous. But I've also noticed this trait, Hital, in people, some of the people who are, whatever you might call them, successful from
Yeah.
in the traditional sense of the word. You talk to them, they will always say, "Oh, I love what I do." So it is, do you do what you love or do you love what you do?
Yeah.
You tend to see that framing in people who are doing well, that whatever you begin to do, you love it.
Yeah.
And so you are going in with the knowledge that you will make it work and that you will love it. So it is, in design thinking, again, framing and reframing is an important concept. When you are working in any area, how you frame the opportunity, how you frame the environment will actually determine the output and your experience of it as well. So luck, of course, has played so much part throughout the journey, but it is also how you frame each opportunity or challenge as you traverse
Yeah.
these life
So
moments.
the other element is risk, and which of the philosophy is what you advocate to your children? Being more bold, taking more risk, or taking the so-called comfort path just because that's something which you can provide them? Which is the two options which you advocate?
Yeah, my children will not listen to what I say most of the time, but they have a mind of their own. They have their own frameworks. But the way I see it, Hetal, is our generation grew up in the paradigm of scarcity. We always viewed opportunities from a lens of insecurity. If I don't work hard, I won't get it. If you do not become an engineer or a doctor, you won't be able to do anything. You knew who would be standing first in class and second in class and third. Our children have grown up in the paradigm of abundance. So
Yeah.
they do not view the world from the lens of insecurity. In fact, they have so many choices and options in front of them. For them, it is extremely important to really even more important to understand yourself and what will give you the satisfaction, the joy. So really understanding your strengths, yourself much better so that you can align with the choices that you have. Because otherwise, in their case, they can actually get into either paralysis mode, where analysis paralysis, you're thinking pros and cons. Should I do this? Should I do that? So my advice, by and large, is you do not think your way forward, you build your way forward. It is through action that you will start to figure things out. You can't be just sitting here and saying, I have all these choices, this will be better or this. You will finally have to prototype a few things and
Mhm.
say, okay, given this is what I like. And then you build your way forward. And you have that scaffolding. If this doesn't work, you have that option. So doing some thinking around, this is my plan A and this is my plan B. But these kids have a lot more appetite and an opportunity to take risks than we had in the earlier years while we were growing up.
Which is the advice which you were given and you're glad you did not take it? Or something that was traditionally assumed that you would do and you're glad that you didn't follow?
Advice that I've been given all along is be assertive.
Okay.
That's the feedback by and large that comes to me. Be assertive. And I have tried to work on it somewhat, but there is a wiring of the personality. But then I won't say I haven't taken it. I've worked on it. But there is an advantage to having the personality also. I've ended up building great relationships, great friendships, deep relationships, professional, personal, because of who I am. And I'll probably have to decipher it even more. I'm not saying if you are assertive, you can't do that. Possibly you can do that. But that is the advice that I've been given quite a bit, that you should be a lot more assertive.
Which is the question which you still don't have an answer to? And we spoke about spirituality in the beginning. So it's orienting towards that, right?
I lost my sister about 2 years ago, and that shook me. My older sister, she was 18 years older than me, and that shook me quite a bit and disturbed me. And that's when I started to read a little bit of Vedanta, spirituality, moving in that direction. And through that process, one is just understanding the framing, the philosophy, whatever. The second is being aware. जो मनन बोलते हैं, you become aware of your thoughts, of your actions, how you're feeling, where you might be right, where you might be wrong, where your brain is telling you stories. So I think the awareness has grown. The place where I'm spending a lot of time is change. Change is very, very hard. Even when you are aware of the problem, even when you want to change, it is extremely hard because you are wired to behave a certain way. And you know that that's the one path you will automatically, instinctively take. When you think you have to change, you don't know you are going here. What is the language you're using? I think that's the piece that I'm spending a lot of time and thinking about is change, and really not trying to change the world or anybody else, but bringing that change in yourself. Because when you bring that change in yourself, you begin to see the world from a different lens, and the whole scenery actually looks different. So, knowing can come from reading, understanding, talking. Awareness you can build through some of the practices. It could be meditation, it could be just really making conscious effort to be aware. But I think change, even then, is extremely hard, and that's its own journey.
I know that beautiful line is there. When you change the way you look at the world you look at changes.
Yes, exactly.
Okay, a quick rapid fire. Life in US, life in India.
Life in India, no doubt.
Life in Gurgaon, life in Bangalore.
Life in Bangalore, no doubt.
Favorite alma mater, IITD or INSEAD?
That's a tough one. You're going to get me in trouble. Some of my closest friendships are from INSEAD, but I grew a lot. IT was just put my life trajectory in a different orbit. So I'd have to say both.
Hollywood or Bollywood?
Bollywood.
And I'm spacing this apart. On your deathbed, which one you would feel proud the most? Intellitots, Avishkaar or Udaiti?
I think on deathbed, I would just like to be surrounded with my family and friends. I don't think I will be thinking too much about the work. But Udaiti, if we are really able to make a dent, would give me significant satisfaction and joy.
Got it. Chai or coffee?
Chai. I'm a desi. You can see I'm a desi at heart.
So that completes. Now comes my favorite part. What's the question you have for me?
For you. Okay. You think so much about courage. Two things actually. One is I would love to know what books you are reading right now.
Sure.
Because I know we connected on the books front. But otherwise, you have talked to so many people about courage. One, what is your understanding of what courage means? And two, for you personally, what are some of the acts of courage?
Sure. For me, the first thing which comes is how understated courage is. And in all the conversations I've had, and I think I said this to someone, this is probably the 60th episode. No definition of courage on Courage Talks has been repeated. Everyone has a different approach and a version when I ask them what's your definition of courage. In fact, I still remember when I initiated this podcast, my daughter was like, why are you asking definition of courage? Everyone knows definition of courage. I said, no, I don't think it's that straightforward a question. And for me, speaking up when everyone else is quiet, is
Yes.
probably one of the best forms of courage. At the same time, keeping quiet when everyone around you is screaming is even bigger form of courage. And I have a lot of people talk about my time management, and not involving myself in any kind of arguments or any kind of discussions of WhatsApp group is probably one of my biggest act of courage.
I do that too.
I
I do
just
that too.
I just walk away. And
Yeah.
even in physical circumstances,
Mhm.
people might call me a coward or whatever, but I really don't feel that demonstrating my point of view is anyway an act of courage. Everyone has their learning journey. Everyone has a background to why they are the way they are. It is not a particular moment where you can change them, even if you try to. And the joke was, right, I mean, if you can't change yourself, where is the question of changing the world? And we find it most difficult to change ourselves, yet we are go out of our way trying to change other people, and we
Right.
make a fool of ourselves. And I think I've learned a lot of this from my daughter, where I felt that she has learned the most when I've let her be the easiest on her own.
Yes.
And the moment I try to infringe on her inner circle, I have had to take a step back. And once, in fact, it's my love for running and her not being, and my love for reading and her not actively being interested in books. She's like, Daddy, the more you say, the more I feel like don't want to read. I'm like, yeah.
Good.
So that's the part on courage, and it's been quite underlying. And I think a lot of people have said that, but to be able to write a book for my father, a lot of people have appreciated the fact. Especially father and son relationships are not the most cutest. In fact, they are the most silent. Between the parents and siblings, the least conversation would be between a dad and son. Mom and daughter talk a lot. While they talk a lot of crap, okay, but it's their way of bonding, right?
Yes.
You would not be giving your daughter a lot of advice. You would be
Mm.
just chatting up and being a friend. Father and daughter, of course, is a different level of bond, but father and son is invariably is a relatively a tougher relationship. And for me, I think the last 12 months I spent with my father, they were the most valuable 12 months for my life, because he was at a stage where he wanted to give and I was open to receive. So I think that kind of was a very mutually beneficial relationship we had between each other. And coming to the book, it's interesting that you asked, because it's a book which is a must read for every woman, whether you are into physical activities or not. It's called Better, Faster, Further by
Mhm.
Maggie Mertens.
Okay.
It has chronologically talked about women's participation in running right from 1920s, when women were not part of Olympics. And then she started the movement of getting athletics to absorb women, and they were not agreed upon. And she started a movement, she started a parallel organization, and it describes the whole biological aspect, the psychological aspect, the social aspect, a lot of which is still holds true, which still makes it even more difficult. And it blew my mind. The book before this, which really blew my mind about women and the biology aspect of women, is a book called Eve. So again, it was a great book. And yeah, so I think that's kind of been quite instrumental. The other interesting book I'm reading is called How We Decide, and it talks about the entire decision making process in terms of how our mind decides different things in different situations,
Yeah.
how different situations tend to make you decide. And it takes up different examples of an aircraft pilot versus a baseball player, and how in those split second you take a decision. And
Yeah.
I remember this particular clip of Virat Kohli where he's being interviewed about this one of the World Cup matches against Pakistan, where the need of the hour was to hit two sixes back to
Hmm.
back. And the way he described that, he let his subconscious prevail. He did not even see the ball, and both the balls went for six, is the way
Right.
he describes it. And
Right.
I realize it's so magical that sometimes we spend hours trying to take a decision and it turns out to be wrong. And sometimes we take a split second decision and it turns out to be one of the best decisions of our lives.
Yeah. I read a book last year called The User Illusion
Okay.
along the same line. So it didn't have a framing like that. Basically, the idea was that we take in information, our bodies are
Yeah.
take in information at almost 120 million bits per second. And what the brain processes is 16 bits per second.
Wow.
From that to this, and a video is 40,000 bits per second. So there is so much that you are absorbing in your subconscious. The brain is only playing a very, very small part in it. And even there, because of evolutionary impulses, fear plays a big role there. So
Right.
to your example of Virat Kohli,
Virat
that
Kohli. So 3 books which you have recommended the most or have impacted you the most? Top of the
that's
mind. I
a
know there
long
will be
list
many.
again. But for me, one is Flow, which is Flow
Makes
by Positive Psychology, the father of positive psychology, 𝗪𝗂𝗂𝗂𝗂𝗂𝗂𝗂𝗂𝗂𝗂𝗂𝗂𝗂𝗂𝗂𝗂𝗂𝗂𝗂𝗂𝗂𝗂𝗂𝗂𝗂𝗂𝗂𝗂𝗂𝗂𝗂𝗂𝗂𝗂𝗂𝗂𝗂𝗂𝗂𝗂𝗂𝗂𝗂𝗂𝗂𝗂𝗂𝗂𝗂𝗂𝗂𝗂𝗂𝗂𝗂𝗂𝗂𝗂𝗂𝗂𝗂𝗂𝗂𝗂𝗂𝗂𝗂𝗂𝗂𝗂𝗂𝗂𝗂𝗂𝗂𝗂𝗂𝗂𝗂𝗂𝗂𝗂𝗂𝗂𝗂𝗂𝗂𝗂𝗂𝗂𝗂𝗂𝗂𝗂 second book, which these are all more kind of philosophical side, but there are others, is a book that sounds very morose, but actually it's about life. It's called How We Die, Sherwin Newland. He was a doctor, but I love these books where there is technical information, but there is some philosophy and really high quality writing. And it's so beautifully written. And it's also foundational text on how bodies age and we die. Then everything by Siddharth Mukherjee, all three books by Siddharth Mukherjee. I just love it for exactly the same reason. He's just such a lovely author, and he does storytelling well, and then gives that information well as well. So the Gene, Song of the Cell, Emperor of Maladies, all of them I love. Fiction, Amitabh Ghosh, I love Amitabh Ghosh. So between these, depending, short history of nearly everything, then an amazing. Some of these science books which you read, you feel like almost a teacher is talking to you and you wish you had that teacher. So Walter Levine's For the Love of Physics, or I know you only asked me for 3, but depending on who
an avid reader doesn't stop at 3.
Depending on who is receiving the gift, I will try to see, which one will they connect with.
True. No, thanks a lot, Pooja. It's been phenomenal, and again, I've set a new record for the longest episode.
Thank you, 𝗀𝗏𝗏. Thank you. It was lovely talking to you.
Pleasure. Thank you.